In this lesson, we are going to be looking at how air is moved into the lungs and how it is also expelled. And we are going to be focusing on the lungs and the adaptations that are found in the lungs that help with this movement of the gases. So as all cells are respiring and as we move with exercise, that oxygen demand is greater. The lungs have to be able to supply oxygen to the respiring cells, and this is what we're going to be looking at this lesson. Today we're going to be looking at breathing and gas exchange. So we've looked at to date how the blood vessels are constructed, the various types of blood vessels. We've looked at the flow of blood in the blood vessels and how they can be different depending on the type of vessel that we're looking at. We've looked at the structure of the heart and the circulatory system. Now we're going to move on to how respiration takes place and specifically the breathing process and gas exchange. So can you put the title Breathing and Gas Exchange? And the two learning objectives today are, first one, to understand the structure of the human gas exchange system. So we're going to look at the structure of this gas exchange system. And part B, we're going to explore how gases are exchanged in the alveoli of the lungs. So we're going to specifically look at this section of the lungs and we're going to see how that's adapted to its function of gas exchange. With a few warm-up questions, and this will refer to work that we've already covered so far. So the first one is, why does food swallowed or food that is swallowed not mix with air breathed in? So 3 marks here. Why is food that is swallowed why does it not mix with air that is breathed in? 3 marks. So can you just put question 1A and can you give me an answer to explain why this is the case? 1 part B. What gas is needed by respiring cells? So this is just a 1 mark question. What gas is needed by respiring cells? Part C. What gas moves out of blood in the lungs? So what gas moves out of blood in the lungs? What gas moves out of blood in the lungs? And specifically, I want you to focus on a waste product. So a waste product, because we are going to look at the composition of air coming in and out of the lungs, and with that it'll take on a new perspective. So to make this question a bit more clearer, what waste gas moves out of the blood in the lungs? So at the lungs, what waste gas moves out? So that's just 1 mark question. Can you make sure that you number it 1A, B and C? Can you write in full sentences? And we'll move on to the next set of questions. The last 2 questions, can you number it in order as well? I know it says 1A here, but on your sheet, can you follow it on from the previous questions? So the first one, looking at this diagram, part A, what is an organ system? 1 mark. Then part B, I want you to name the parts of the human digestive system based on this diagram. This diagram should not be new to you. You have come across this before, but without looking at your notes, can you quickly label parts A to F? And it's 6 marks. Because of this 6 mark question, we'll extend the time by another 6 minutes onto what we had previously. So can you answer these 2 questions? Follow it on from previous starter questions, and can you submit your document on Teams? So let us now look at gas movement, how the gas is moving in and out of the lungs. For humans, to move air in and out of the lungs, a steep concentration gradient is maintained. Now, you would have come across the concept of diffusion, and how diffusion is the movement of particles, whether in a gas or a liquid, from a high concentration to a low concentration. And maintaining a steep concentration gradient is simply maintaining these two regions of high and low. So for humans to move air in and out of the lungs, a steep concentration gradient is maintained. This means having a large difference in the concentrations of gases on either side of the exchange membrane. So we'll be looking at the exchange membrane at the alveoli or the alveolus, and we'll be seeing how that how the concentration gradient, the steep concentration gradient, is maintained in this way. Now, this is achieved by moving the air in and out of the lungs regularly, and this process is known as breathing. So we maintain a steep concentration gradient, and this is done, if we want to look at it on an overall picture, it's done by moving the air in and out of the lungs regularly, i.e. breathing in and breathing out. So can we just put the subheading gas movement, and can you just summarize, take these 3 summary points down, please? So as I said, gas exchange system work efficiently, you need to have a large difference in concentration of the gases on different sides of the exchange membrane, i.e. where the gas exchange takes place at the lungs. And many large animals, including humans, move air in and out of the lungs regularly, and this is how the steep concentration gradient is maintained. We change the composition of the air in the lungs, and by doing so, that steep concentration gradient is maintained for the oxygen that is diffusing into the blood and the carbon dioxide that is diffusing out of the blood. And that's what we call ventilating the lungs or breathing. So you can summarize it in these 3 points which I put here. Humans move air in and out of the lungs. For humans to move air in and out of the lungs, we need a steep concentration gradient, and this means having a large difference in concentrations of gases on either side of the exchange membrane at the lungs, and we'll look at how the lungs are adapted for this. And this is achieved by moving air in and out of the lungs regularly, i.e. breathing. So now let us look at the ventilation of the lungs. So what we say is that the lungs are required to move air in and out of the body. And as we've looked at just a few moments ago, we need to maintain a steep concentration gradient. Now, the lungs are found in the thorax, the chest. So the first point I want you to put down is that lungs located in the thorax and this is the chest cavity, or the chest. So lungs are located in the thorax, i.e. the chest, and the lungs are protected by the rib cage. So next point is lungs are protected by the rib cage. So lungs are located in the thorax, i.e. the chest, and the lungs are protected by the rib cage. Now the digestive organs are separated from the lungs by the diaphragm. So they are separated from the digestive organs beneath the diaphragm. So the diaphragm will separate the digestive organs from the respiratory system. So that's our next point. So can you put down the diaphragm acts as a separator. Separator between the digestive organs. Now, this diaphragm, it's a strong sheet of muscle, and what happens is that when you're breathing in and out, this diaphragm will actually change its position. And by the changing of its position, it causes air to move in and out, which we will come on to later on. You will see how air moves in and out based on how the diaphragm and the rib cages are coordinatively moving together, and this causes air to move in and out. So the job of the ventilation system is to move air in and out of the lungs. And this provides, and the lungs also provide an efficient surface for the gas exchange to occur. But right now we're just looking at the whole ventilation mechanism as a whole. So the first thing is where the lungs are located and how the lungs are protected and how they're separated from the digestive organs. Now, ventilation is brought about in the lungs by the relaxation or the contraction of special muscles known as intercostal muscles. And intercostal muscles are found between the ribs and the diaphragm. And these relaxations and contraction of the diaphragm and the coordination with the intercostal muscle causes a change in pressure inside the chest cavity. And this will actually either force air out or it will draw air in to the lungs. Because what the changing position of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles also, where there's contraction and relaxation, it causes a difference in air pressure. And this is what causes the air to either be expelled or drawn into the lungs. So can we write that ventilating the lungs is achieved via contraction and relaxation of muscles known as intercostal muscles. Okay, and these intercostal muscles are found between the ribs, and the contraction or relaxation of these intercostal muscles is going to cause the difference in air pressure. And these intercostal muscles can be found in between the ribs and the diaphragm. So these intercostal muscles are found located between the ribs and diaphragm. So just be aware where you will find the intercostal muscles and where you find them located between the ribs and the diaphragm. Now, I'll repeat again. When there is a contraction or relaxation of the intercostal muscles in coordination with the diaphragm, there is a change in pressure in the chest cavity. And this is due to, and this will cause either air to be drawn in or air to be expelled out of the lungs. So can we just note down in terms of the differences of pressure that is created, how that results in air coming in and out of the lungs. So can we just note down that changes in the pressure, so changes in pressure inside the chest cavity. So changes in pressure inside the chest cavity brought about by the contraction or relaxation of the intercostal muscles between the ribs and the diaphragm. Forces, so changes in air pressure inside the chest cavity will either force air out or in to the lungs. So the contraction and relaxation of the intercostal muscles between the ribs and the diaphragm, and also the diaphragm moving as well, will change the pressure inside the chest cavity. And this will either force air in or out of the lungs. And you can see that happening here in this simulation where you're looking at the movement of the lungs and how the chest cavity is expanding and contracting in terms of when you're breathing in or out. Now, when you breathe in, oxygen-rich air is moving into the lungs, and this maintains a steep concentration gradient with the blood. And as a result, oxygen continually diffuses into the bloodstream through the gas exchange surfaces of the alveoli. Okay, so for this task here, I'm going to give you a picture that you should be familiar with. And what I want you to do is identify the different regions of this diagram. I've numbered it 1 to 12. So you can either take a screenshot or you can list on your notes 1, 2, 3, 4 to 5 and up to 12. And what I want you to do is to correctly label each blue box here with its corresponding number. So what would number 2 be? So you have to put 2 answer and then 3 answer. And I would like you to create a list and upload that onto Teams so I can just check that. So identify the parts that have been highlighted in blue here, and could you put the correct number as you label the diagram and send it over on Teams. So take 10 minutes to look at this diagram and try and put a correct label for each blue box. Now I want you to put the subheading breathing in, and I would like you to sketch this diagram of the chest cavity, and I want you to carefully look at the steps involved for breathing in. So when atmospheric air is drawn into the lungs, look at the steps involved. So for breathing in, what happens is, as the ribs will move up and out and the diaphragm flattens, the volume of the chest increases. And the increased volume means a low pressure in the chest. And this causes the atmospheric pressure, which is at a higher pressure outside of the chest, to be drawn into the lungs. So again, there are key words here that I want you to actually underline. So the first one is, as ribs move, the ribs will move up and out. So this is when we're breathing in, and the diaphragm will flatten. This causes the volume of the chest increases. So can you make sure that you are underlining these key words when you're writing your notes? Because you do need to, some questions do ask you to outline the steps involved for breathing, for moving air into the lungs or moving air out of the lungs, which we're going to look at next. So can you make sure that you are clearly underlining the important words here? So once the ribs move up and out and the diaphragm has flattened, and you'll see why it's flattened in comparison to the next image, this causes the volume of the chest to increase. Now, step 2. Because the volume of the chest has increased, we have a lower pressure in the chest now. And this causes air to be drawn into the lungs. So this causes air to be drawn into the lungs. So can you sketch this diagram of the chest cavity for breathing in, and can you note the 3 steps involved for breathing in? When we are breathing out, we have these following steps. So could you put the subheading breathing out, and just as before, can you quickly now separate it from breathing in, but make another quick sketch showing how the chest cavity would appear. And here you can see there's a significant difference in the shape of the diaphragm when we're breathing out compared to when we're breathing in. So let's look at the steps for breathing out and what happens with the rib cage and the diaphragm. So when we breathe out, the ribs fall and the diaphragm moves upwards. The volume of the chest gets smaller. Now, if the volume of the chest gets smaller, this means that we're going to increase the pressure in the chest. Just as if you had, let's say, a gas canister and the gas canister was full. It's a full gas canister. Now, if you suddenly start compressing the sides of the gas canister, and you keep compressing the gas canister, which is full of gas, of any particular gas, you'll find that there's a good chance that the gas canister will explode. This is because of an increased pressure, because as you reduce the volume, you're going to increase the pressure. And this is also similar to what's happening in our chest cavity, in our chest, that when the diaphragm moves up, the volume of the chest gets smaller because we've decreased the volume. This means there's an increase in pressure. This means there's increased pressure in the chest. And if there's increased pressure in the chest, what will happen is that as this will cause the air to be forced out of the lungs. So pressure in the chest is higher than outside than the atmospheric pressure. So air will be forced out of the lungs. So these are the steps involved for breathing out. So can you just again make, just as you did for breathing in, can you leave a few lines gap, and can you quickly just roughly sketch how the chest cavity appears, and make sure you identify the steps and the keywords clearly for breathing out. Here we are looking at the composition of inhaled and exhaled air. So when we inhale or exhale the air, we are taking in these types of gases. We're focusing on these types of gases. There could be other gases in the atmosphere that we breathe in also. However, we're focusing on three particular gases: nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. Now, percentage of the air breathed in, we say it's approximately 80%, and approximately 20% of oxygen we breathe in and 0.04% carbon dioxide. If you compare this to our previous lessons on the atmosphere and the composite and when we looked at air pollution and we looked at the standard composition of atmospheric gases, you will see that these numbers are similar, i.e. for the percentage of air that we breathe into the lungs. Now, when we look at the percentage of air breathed out, we notice nitrogen pretty much comes out. It's not reacting and it's not being used up by our system. Oxygen is 16% because we have respiring cells and we have an oxygen demand from our respiring cells. So that is understandably lower. But also notice that it's not all of we don't use up all of it. We say that there is a reduction to show that we do have an oxygen demand from our respiring cells. Now, looking at carbon dioxide. So what I want you to do is you can take 10 minutes here because I want you to copy the table and I want you to answer the question here. Explain why we breathe out more carbon dioxide than we breathe in. So if you look at the values, we have 0.04% carbon dioxide breathed in, but when we breathe out, we have approximately 4%. So what's the reason for this? So I want you to explain why we breathe out more carbon dioxide than we breathe in. So can you construct your answer? And we'll say this is a 3-mark answer. So I do not want just a one-word answer. I want a constructed answer to why we have more carbon dioxide percentage breathed out compared to the percentage of carbon dioxide breathed in. Why do we have this significantly more? It's quite, when you look at the difference from 0.04 to 4%, that's a huge jump, because even if you take a look at the other percentages for oxygen, there is a reduction, but it's not a huge reduction. But when you look at the jump from 0.04 to 4% to approximately 4%, that's quite a significant jump. What is causing this significant jump? Why do we have this increased amount? So can you take 10 minutes, copy the table down, and then answer this question? And can I have your question to this task posted back on Teams? Could you put the subheading, Adaptations of the Alveoli? When we talk about how the lungs are adapted for gas exchange, we say that the lungs are specifically adapted to make gas exchange happen more efficient by the alveoli and how that aids in efficient gas exchange. So the lungs are made up of clusters of alveoli. And you can see on this simulation how these clusters are grouped together. And you can see the alveoli with the capillaries, the blood capillaries also there. So the lungs are made up of clusters of alveoli that provide a large surface area for efficient gas exchange to happen. So they allow for the maximum amount of area in the lungs to be exposed to the gases, and this is achieved in a number of ways which we're going to look at. One way in which we have a large surface area for efficient gas exchange to occur is by having a rich supply of blood capillaries in the alveoli. And alveolus is singular, and alveoli is the alveoli is a group of these clusters. Now, having a rich supply of blood capillaries with the alveoli will ensure that the concentration gradient is maintained in both directions of the gas exchange. So can you just take down these 2 points in terms of adaptations? We're going to look at a number of adaptations. So the first two adaptations are here. So the lungs are made up of clusters of alveoli that provide a large surface area for more efficient gas exchange, and the alveoli have a rich supply of blood capillaries. This will maintain a concentration gradient in both directions. The other method by which the lungs maintain a steep concentration gradient is because the blood coming to the lungs, to the alveoli, is always relatively low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide. So when the blood is coming to the lungs from the rest of the body, it is low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide when we compare it to the air that is inhaled into the lungs. So on comparison, the blood coming to the lungs from the rest of the body is low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide in comparison to the air inhaled in. Now, this causes the exchange of gases to occur down the steepest possible concentration gradient. And because we have this difference in concentrations of air coming from the rest of the body at the lungs and air coming from the atmosphere, we have a steep concentration gradient, and this again enables diffusion to occur in a more efficient way. So can you just pause the video here? And look at the simulation for a while? I'll leave the video running for a while. And can you take down the 2 points here in terms of maintaining a steep concentration gradient by looking at the concentration of gases in the lungs that have come from the rest of the body compared to inhaled air or gases from the atmosphere. Now, the final type of feature or adaptation that we look at in terms of the lungs is to say that the layers of cells between the air in the lungs and the blood in the capillaries is very thin. So when we look at that membrane, or how thick that membrane is between the air in the lungs and the blood flowing through the capillaries, that distance is very small. And you can see in the diagram that's shown at the top, you can see that distance represented. Now, because it's one cell thick, and you can see the cells here with the nucleus, so you can see that layer of one cell wide or one cell thick. This allows the shortest distance for diffusion to occur. So diffusion can happen very rapidly, and it makes gas exchange more efficient. So the layers of cell between the air in the lungs and the blood in the capillaries, which is flowing around the alveolus here, is only 1 cell wide or 1 cell thick. This allows diffusion to occur rapidly and more efficiently. Because if you had a thicker layer there, if there were many cells, if there were, let's say, 4 or 5 cells wide, then the gases would have to pass through each one of those cells to get to the blood in the capillaries. So by making it 1 cell wide, we create a very short distance for diffusion to take place. So you don't have to draw the diagram down. You can either take a screenshot of that diagram, but you must take down the points that have been mentioned here. For the last 20 minutes, I want you to answer these questions here. So the task for the last part of the lesson is to answer the questions here and upload your answers onto Teams with the document. And can you make sure you number your questions and write in full sentences, not just one-word answers? Question 3, where it says draw a bar chart to show the difference in composition between the air you breathe in and the air you breathe out. Use the data in table 1. That is the table that was given with the compositions of air earlier on in this video. So from your notes, that is your table 1 for question 3. So I'll repeat again, task now. Can you, on a Word document, number your questions, and can you write in full sentences and upload your answers back to me on Teams?